Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. There's a great energy in here, and I'm just so excited for this talk tonight. So welcome to the final installment of our Heroes Lecture Series. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Swanson, Interpretation and Public Engagement Educator here at the museum. And for those of you who have not been to our series so far this year, I'll tell you a little bit about our annual theme of heroes. Our Heroes theme in 2023 is concerned with celebrating the courage of people moved by conviction, truth, and love to improve communities, societies, and our worlds. The effect of heroes is subtle and monumental, local and global, and lingers long after they are gone. Although this is the last lecture this year, there are so many more opportunities to engage with heroes for the next 8 months, including this Saturday, for example, at our Heroes Family Day. And of course, always look at our website, get on our mailing list to make sure that you're up to date on all our programming. So for me, having only lived in the Southern Tier for a handful of years, I'm not sure when I first learned about the John W. Jones Museum and his story, but when we determined our 2023 annual theme, I knew this was a non-negotiable program. And that sentiment was, of course, unanimously supported by my colleagues, and judging by our crowd this evening, our instincts were right that this is an important hero story to tell. While we're thrilled to be hosting the talk this evening, we also would really like this to be an opportunity, an introduction, to plug in to support the work that Talima Aaron, our speaker, and the board, and everyone involved with the John W. Jones Museum is doing to keep the legacy alive. After you leave here today, think about how you can support and get involved, visit the museum, keep this great energy going, and turn it into action. I feel that we really need stories like that of Mr. Jones to demonstrate how to persevere in the face of really seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Right? Working to preserve John Jones' legacy has probably at times seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, but that's one that's been met with grace by the current board president and our speaker this evening, Talima Aaron. Since joining the John W. Jones Board of Trustees Finance Committee in 2004, Talima Aaron has advanced the museum's restoration, preservation, and education efforts. Her grant-writing efforts on these objectives have raised significant funding for restoring and stabilizing the building. From 2008 is what my brain wanted. From 2008 to 2016, she served as second vice president, and she has been serving as president of the board since 2016. Under her leadership, the museum opened its doors to the public in 2016. Talima is retired from Cornell Incorporated's Science and Technology Human Resource Training Team. She previously worked at Aetna Life Casualty and received her Chartered Property Casualty Underwriter designation during her tenure there. She knows a lot about numbers, is what I'm trying to tell you. She's a graduate of the State University of New York and completed Human Resources and Train the Trainer programs at Cornell's University School of Industrial Relations. And she's lived in Elmira for over 40 years. Please help me welcome Talima Aaron.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Kate, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. She got something wrong there. She said something about 40 years. I've only been here 10. So, John W. Jones, and I want to thank the Rockwell for giving me this platform to talk about my favorite person next to my husband, John W. Jones, because without this story, history is not complete, right? And this is a very positive reference for Elmira, and I'm all about the positivity right about now, so I'm glad to share this story. John W. Jones's passing did not go unnoticed. The life and death of this well-known and esteemed citizen was newsworthy. A headline in the Elmira Daily Gazette and Free Press dated December 27, 1900 read, "Death of prominent colored citizen, born a slave, died rich, originator of the Underground Railroad." And this notice appeared in an out-of-town newspaper. The funeral of John W. Jones, the most noted colored or mulatto citizen of Elmira, a former slave in the South and a man of rare intelligence and considerable wealth, took place in that city December the 29th, and was very numerously attended. He was for many years the sexton and usher of the First Baptist Church of Elmira and was highly respected and esteemed for his many good qualities and gentlemanly manners. On December the 26, 1900, Mr. Jones, age 83, died at his home in Elmira, New York, after battling pneumonia for a few weeks. Jones, a loved and respected black man, had amassed what was considered a fortune. In fact, he was the wealthiest black man in the Western New York area, and one of the few rich black men in the state. So who was John W. Jones, and why was he respected and loved by so many? Accounts of his life of service, recorded in newspapers, books, and letters, help to give perspective and context to the complex history of Mr. John W. Jones. It is through this lens you see Jones demonstrate his conviction and strong character, which is shaped by his values and commitment to social justice and racial equality. We also learn of his contributions to local and national history. As incredible as it sounds today, many Americans believed back then that slaves were incapable of thinking for themselves and could not survive on their own. They believed that the black man was created by God to serve a white master and found passages in the Bible to prove it. Some slaveholders even argued they were doing their slaves a favor by providing them with food and shelter. Still others felt that slavery was wrong and slaves should be freed, but not until that last harvest was completed. After all, the enslaved were valuable property as free labor. And once freed, black people were considered inferior and not entitled to the full rights of American citizenship. John's first act of defiance against the institution of slavery was to plan and execute his and 4 others' successful escape when he was 27 years old. John was born to an enslaved mother on the Elyse plantation in Leesburg, Virginia. According to John, he had a pleasant childhood, as pleasant as it could be when you're in bondage. He was a favorite pet of Miss Elyse, the mistress and kindly old spinster. It was only when it was evident that the plantation would be passed into other hands, and he realized he might be sold, that he decided to flee with his mother's blessing. John, his 2 half-brothers, Charles and George, and 2 other men from a nearby plantation walked for 14 days, covering almost 300 miles, only hiring a ride from a farmer for the last 8. The party hid by day and traveled by night. They had a change of clothes, provisions for 4 days, a little money, and were well armed. It was difficult and exhausting, and they evaded slave catchers twice. The January 31st, 1892 Elmira Telegraph said Jones stated that he would never be taken alive, and his acquaintances knew what such a declaration meant. When they were close to Elmira, they happened upon the Bradford County, PA farm of Nathaniel Smith and took shelter in his barn. Mrs. Sarah Smith discovered the fugitives and fed them for nearly a week until they were well enough to travel again. Jones was overwhelmed with gratitude and never forgot her kindness. They arrived in Elmira July 1844, a month after they first set out. Jones had less than $1.60 in his pocket, and once they settled in Elmira, he quickly established himself as a smart and industrious citizen. Jones had several jobs, including working as sexton of First Baptist Church in 1847, a position he held for 43 years. So you ask, what is a sexton? Well, according to Merriam-Webster, and I did look it up, I went to Google. A sexton is a church officer or employee who takes care of the church property and performs related minor duties, such as ringing the bell for services and digging graves, a caretaker. Using the money he saved and the salary he earned as sexton, Jones purchased his first home for $500 in 1854. It was a small yellow house next to First Baptist Church near the railroad. So the picture that you're looking at is the original First Baptist Church, and that very fuzzy blow-up is right next to it. That's John Jones's home. First Baptist Church is still in Elmira. It's a beautiful big brick building. Unfortunately, it is closed because parishioners kind of dwindled, but it's right in Wisner Park. Anyway, this small yellow house was also near the railroad. Around this time, Jones married Rachel Swales, who was born in Lancaster County, PA. Although he had 4 children with his wife, there are no known living relatives. Rachel's brother, Stephen Swales, fought in the famous all-black company, the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, eventually becoming a commissioned officer. His house still stands on J Street in Elmira. When Congress passed the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, the Underground Railroad was quickly formed. The act required that slaves be returned to their owners even if they were in a free state. This controversial law allowed slave hunters to seize alleged fugitive slaves without due process of law and prohibited anyone from aiding escaped fugitives or obstructing their recovery. Despite the harsh penalties that the law imposed on sympathizers, Jones was never betrayed. Elmira was the last published regular station on the Underground Railroad between Philadelphia and Canada. Jones quietly took command of the Underground in Elmira. Freedom seekers were funneled to Elmira from Harrisburg in Pennsylvania en route to St. Catharines in Canada. In an 1896 letter written by Jones, the Northern Central Railroad was built through Elmira a few years after he arrived and was used for underground purposes from the very beginning. For over 9 years prior to the Civil War, Jones worked courageously developing and maintaining relationships with the small group of local sympathizers and railroad personnel for the safe escape of the freedom seekers. Now, another definition. The Underground Railroad was not a real train, right? But a secret, complex network of abolitionists, and they were both black and white. Sympathizers, safe houses that stretched from Philadelphia to what is now southern Ontario. So this Underground Railroad was really just in the north. Jones, however, hid fugitives in the baggage car of an actual train that went directly to Niagara Falls via Watkins Glen and Canandaigua. He used the 4 o'clock Northern Central train so often it was called the Freedom Baggage Car. As an active agent and central figure in Elmira's Underground, John Jones sheltered as many as 30 people at once in his home by the church. Now, can you imagine? I don't want a relative to stay past 4 days. So, coordinating the efforts of local supporters who supplied whatever was needed. Foremost among the few abolitionists who always gave was J.M. Robinson, who with Jervis Langdon and a few others founded the anti-slavery church, Park Church, that Thomas K. Beecher pastored. And his brother was the sexton of that church, George. His relationship with Jervis Langdon, father-in-law of Mark Twain, was especially close and well documented. Quakers in Pennsylvania and Maryland would write Mr. Jones coded messages of some horse or horses that were missing and ask him to look out for them. Jones also worked closely with William Still, a Philadelphia clerk and black freeman. He was the chief Underground Railroad agent guiding fugitives to freedom in the years leading up to the Civil War. William Still published his definitive book on the Underground Railroad and the freedom seekers who used it. His passion for the cause of freedom was so great that when he died in 1902, the New York Times called him the father of the Underground Railroad. He was also called the architect of the Underground Railroad. Still would forward parties of from 6 to 10 fugitives at a time to Jones in Elmira. A letter from Jones to Still is included in Still's book, The Underground Railroad. It not only establishes Jones' connections beyond a doubt to the Underground Railroad, it also shows his resolve to the cause. A wry sense of humor is glimpsed towards the end of his letter. Friend William Still, all 6 came safe to this place. The 2 men came last night about 12 o'clock. The man and woman stopped at the depot and went east on the next train. about 18 miles and did not get back till tonight, so that the 2 men went this morning and the 4 went this evening. Oh, master, don't cry for me, for I'm going to Canada where colored men are free. P.S. What is the news from the city? Will you tell me how many you've sent to Canada? I would like to know. They all send their love to you. I have nothing new to tell you. We are all in good health. I see there is a law passed in Maryland not to set any slaves free. They had better get the consent of the Underground Railroad before they passed such a thing. Good night from your friend, John Jones. By the end of this period, before emancipation, Jones had directed nearly 800 fugitives to freedom. Most of his baggage landed in St. Catharines, Ontario, and not one, to his knowledge, was ever captured. John Jones was an activist and an abolitionist. An abolitionist is defined as a person who wanted to eliminate slavery during the 19th century, a freedom fighter. Now, most of the times when you hear about abolition in the movement, pretty much you hear about the majority, but African Americans were also involved in their own saving graces, and it doesn't get as much ink. One, it was very, very secret. So they kind of took it to the grave with them. It's not a lot of documentation. So this is another unusual space that John Jones occupies. During the years leading to the Civil War, Jones was extremely busy. While earning a living during the day and saving lives under the cover of night, Jones also worked within the Black community as a member of the organization dedicated to freedom. John Jones was not passive in his quest for equality and actively fought against injustice, especially the institution of slavery. In 1850, the Elmira Colored Citizens Committee was formed. John Jones was chosen as the secretary and also as one of the 5 men appointed to prepare resolutions. Jones helped draft and then recorded these first resolutions. The 4 resolutions were designed to protect Black people from slave catchers and protest the Fugitive Slave Act. The last directed its members to treat anyone aiding slave catchers as an enemy. As he worked in secrecy for the Underground Railroad, Jones was otherwise openly vocal and sometimes physical in expressing his dedication and conviction. An 1854 newspaper article reported a story that a man described as a black rascal had presented himself as a fugitive slave. He had collected almost $5 from abolitionist sympathizers before he was recognized by a colored man who had seen him in Buffalo a few weeks before. Jones pursued the beggar and kicked him severely. The article concludes with Jones making this statement: "Such fellows will do great injury to the actual fugitive by creating in the minds of directors of the Underground Railroad strong suspicions that they are not what they represent themselves to be." Another article illustrates Jones's leadership skills as he used his powers of diplomacy to de-escalate an angry mob and avert a potential riot. In 1858, an old Black man crippled with rheumatism had escaped from Maryland and made it all the way to Canada. When he got there, he was unable to work and could not secure enough food and clothing. So, tired and discouraged, he sent word to his master to come and take him back to Maryland. His master complied, and they headed back south, staying overnight in Elmira. An angry crowd of armed Negroes swarmed the hotel because they thought the white man was a slave catcher with the captured fugitive. John Jones, who was told of the situation, went to the hotel and demanded that the man be brought out or there would be trouble. The man was brought out on the balcony. Jones questions him. Was he willing to return to slavery? He was. Did he love slavery better than liberty? Under the circumstances, he did. Was he going back of his own free will and accord? Yes, he did. Well, amen, said John Jones in conclusion. Go back then. You are not the kind of man we want in this county. That settled the matter and ended the trouble. And this is from an article in 1800s. No man of Elmira white or colored, ever commanded greater respect and admiration from everyone, without exception, than this noble Christian gentleman. Jones was now the sexton of the First Baptist Church Cemetery, the city of Elmira's 2nd Street Cemetery, and appointed the first sexton of the newly established Woodlawn Cemetery in 1859. He was then hired as sexton of the small plot of land set aside for the burial of the Confederate soldiers who died in the Elmira Civil War prison camp. The camp was built for around 5,000 prisoners. It ultimately held 12,000 men. The appalling conditions contributed to the illness and mortality of the Confederate soldiers. Those who survived the winter succumbed to dysentery, smallpox, malnutrition, and typhoid. By the war's end, close to 3,000 prisoners had died. As the burials increased, and they buried upwards to 43 in one day, so in 1 month they had 11 burials. 3 months later, they did 300. Jones negotiated a fee of $250 from the original $40 per month that he was originally offered. So John is described as being extremely intelligent, but I think he was just shrewd, and he definitely understood his worth. This was a very unusual space for a Black man to be in, even now, to renegotiate your own wages, when so many others were not getting paid. So he had a very unique experience because it was not easy in the North, and it wasn't the hotbed of sympathy. It was a handful of sympathizers. So when I read that and I found that, and internalized this, to know that this man saw that he was doing upwards of 40 a day. Oh no, I think I need a per diem type thing going on here. So smart, but fair. He supervised a crew of up to 12 men for the burials, but was present for each, ensuring that they were done properly. It was a labor which he performed with compassionate dignity and care. He kept meticulous records of each burial, including the name, rank, company, regiment, date of death, and grave number, which he also wrote on the lids of the coffin. The same information was written on a slip of paper and placed in a sealed jar, which he put inside the coffin with the body. He also gathered whatever personal effects he could and saved them. When the families received the precious family photographs, treasures, letters, and remembrances that Jones had kept for them, they were so moved that only 3 bodies were removed for burial. So at the end of the war, families came from the South to claim the remains of their loved ones. When they saw how respectfully Jones had interred these bodies, the conditions, the fact that he tried to gather whatever they had, and he was able to give this to the families, they just felt that they were laid out just so well that they didn't want to move them. In the end, he had buried 2,973, and only 7 were listed as unknown. And there's some stories around that, like a couple of the soldiers were so dedicated, I don't want to say bitter or angry, they were so dedicated to the Confederate cause they wouldn't give their real names, that type of thing. So that was the only reason that he had 7 unknowns. When a soldier by the name of John R. Rollins died at the camp, Jones recognized the name as the son of the Elysee's overseer. Jones notified the family of the son's death in return for a form of kindness and arranged to send the body back to the family. So that's just one example. There's so many stories about Jones's benevolence, but he was so caring, and he really could see the humanity in these young men that were fighting. He said that they were young and far from home, and he could see and feel compassion for these very people that were fighting to keep people like him enslaved. So again, a very unique character. Eventually, more land was needed to build a new Baptist church in 1889. So the church authorities purchased the little yellow house And Jones used the $7,432 he made to buy the 16-acre farm on College Avenue, where he built the home, which is our museum, and spent the remainder of his days. In 1877, the federal government designated Woodlawn as a national cemetery and replaced the wooden markers Jones commissioned for each grave. These are the headstones that you see today, and they are scribed with the information from Jones's records. The federal government also used his documents to make a drawing showing every grave and number. So his records were so meticulous that we in Elmira have a national cemetery, and that's huge. The documentation was just that great and that detailed and that clear. Jones did not harbor ill will towards the young soldiers. It is ironic that the one who was enslaved was also the one who so reverently buried and kept careful records that allow for this history to exist today. People can trace their genealogy. They can come from the South. They can visit the graves of their loved ones because John Jones made it possible. And it's especially ironic because he was uneducated. When Jones arrived in Elmira, there were 2 schools. He was denied entry to both. Now, I think that's because he's 27 years old and they don't want him sitting next to little Susie. He's a grown man, right? Big, strapping man. Jones has this personality where he's able to gather allies, and he worked for Judge Thurston. And Judge Thurston's wife or daughter, I'm not a historian, so I don't have it written down, but his wife or daughter had a school, and Jones got to attend for just 1 season. And he sat next to a 14-year-old boy that kind of helped him. And you see throughout, he's writing letters, he's the secretary, he's keeping records that the government is using to this day. When I talk to young people, I talk about the power of education. And this is the example I use from John Jones. So there's so many aspects to this story that you can share at every level. So again, this is just an amazing feat for someone who received all his formal education in 1 season. So the house becomes a museum. The first house on your left, the one circa 1870, that is the only picture we have. That is his original house. And when we were working our restoration efforts and trying to decide what this was going to look like, we visually interpreted this picture. The next is what it looked like when Lucy Brown saved it. It had fallen into disrepair. It had been a rental. It was it was slated to be condemned, you know. Lucy Brown, the founder, was told and sat in front and gathered a lot of attention through the media, and groups of people got involved. And that group of concerned citizens became the first trustees for the John W. Jones Museum was created and incorporated in 1998. They first got together to save the house and then buy the house, and they were like, what else can we do? So they became a museum, and they did the incorporation, the 501c3, they did all of the legwork that related the foundation for where we are now. But they saved that house. And you can see the first house is on, if you're familiar with Elmira, it's on College Avenue. The address doesn't exist anymore. So he had 16 acres of land, right? He was a farmer. He had fruit trees, hay, so forth and so on. In the 50s, they moved that house to Woodlawn Avenue. And if you've been to John Jones to the museum, it's around the corner from us. When they bought the house, the neighbors still wanted that away from them, right? It's looking kind of raggedy, it's infested, and that's not what you want for your next door. So the museum trustees moved the house to its current position, which I think is fabulous. It's still repositioned on land that would originally have been his anyway, and it's facing the cemetery. So that's how it looked. Well, that's how it looked a few years ago. I need a new roof, okay? But that is what we're working to, visually interpret the museum. And our interpretation, if anybody's been there, inside is stripped of the modern finishes, so you can see his actual wallpaper. And we actually had a conservator come in and tell us that he changed his wallpaper, 8 times. And I was amazed because we've painted twice. So when you come to us, right now our story is told through poster boards, and you can read some of the stuff that I'm telling you right now. So there are tributes around Elmira to Mr. Jones. In addition to the museum and the National Cemetery, his legacy can be seen around the city. This first stone is located near the entrance to Woodlawn National Cemetery. It's a plaque installed by the Daughters of the Confederacy honoring Jones's compassion and respectful interment of the Confederate dead. They did this in 1937. So when you enter the National Cemetery, it's a rock on the ground. And that was my motivation to get the statue commissioned that I'll tell you about later, because I didn't think that was sufficient. This is a picture of John W. Jones Court. In 1953, the city of Elmira opened its first public housing development. And although the buildings were renamed in 2019 by its new owners, the apartments were recently renovated, and individuals and families are making it their home once again. So, they call it a project, and that always has these connotations of low income and, broken families and so on. Well, that's not the story of Jones Court. Jones Court in the 50s and 60s, I hear from the people who lived there, was very much a community. It was a neighborhood with a lot of soul. People who didn't live there wanted to go. They wanted to go there to play. They wanted to spend the night there. The stories that I heard of the beautiful apartments within these buildings, like Mrs. Hall's apartment, where she pickled the cabinets and had white carpeting, and they had storm doors on their apartments. I mean, I just find that amazing. Not what you hear about now as a project. So there's a lot of love that went into this community. It meant a lot to people who grew up there, and they did not know that it was named after this man. So it is now called Libertard. I don't even want to give you that. I'm still calling it John W. Jones Court, as everyone else is. This last stone was dedicated by the students of Elmira's Southside High School Diversity Group, and they're called the Jones Nine, Lucy Brown, and community members. This was done on June 22nd, 1997. It's installed on his grave at Woodlawn Cemetery. And this is really what started it all. Just before this, Lucy's granddaughter, a student at Southside High, it was February, and she's talking to her, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing for Black History Month?" And she says, "Nothing, Grandma." She says, "What do you mean doing nothing? What are you learning?" "Nothing, Grandma." So Lucy decided to find these figures in Elmira that she could share with the kids. She thought that she could engage young people and make them proud and know that their heritage mattered, and there were people who came before them that they did great things. So she started going in and talking to the schools and having, giving some Black History Month program. John Jones was just one of the figures she talked about. So when they were going to tear the house down, somebody called her up and says, "Hey, I know you're interested in this. They're going to tear that house down." And that's how it all started. So these young people had a whole program for the dedication and raised the money and had this stone done. But yeah, Lucy definitely made it happen. Now here I get to tell you about the wonderful things that have happened with your help. The first thing I have to say is thank you all. I know a lot of the people in this room, they've made it possible. The community is really the effort for John W. Jones. We've gotten 2 state grants. Everything else was contributions, donations, local foundations, and I am definitely grateful. Have a great board. We're a working board. We're not exciting, and we're not sophisticated in that you come in and how's the report? That's not us. It is definitely boots to the ground, but we've had a great year. Even during COVID, we got things done. So these are just the highlights. We've always talked about building an interpretation center. That is necessary, but it comes with a huge sticker price, and it's difficult to try to do that now. So we decided we're going to add a room, at least so we can entertain classrooms, tours. We can get 40 people in a room, and we're calling that the annex. So this is our immediate effort. It's something that we can manage with our current resources, so we're raising money towards that. That's a $1 million price tag. The center is something altogether different. So for now, we want to get this annex built. We are honored to be the 33rd recipient of the Toni Morrison Society, A Bench by the Road. I am so excited about this because I got to see the bench in, where were we? We were in Savannah, Hilton Head. And there was a bench there, and I sat in it because I was tired. And I started reading the plaque, and it was, we were at Wrightsville, which is a community, one of the first Black communities that was self-governing on that island, and they're starting to, restore that. Anyway, I saw the bench, I read the information, and I went back to the hotel room and looked it up, and I said, oh, this is cool, I want one. And then I seriously came home and said, why not make the effort? So I pulled it up, and this application was so deceptively simple. I was like, they're punking me. This is not what's your name, what you do, send it in. So I, of course, did a presentation. Here's where we're going to put the bench, under these 2 trees, and, here's the story, here's who we are, this is Elmira. And I talked to the head of the committee, and she was like, you're exactly what we're looking for. So Toni Morrison gave a speech in the 80s, and it was in response to her writing Sula, I think. And she, at that time, it was the 80s, she said, and I'm paraphrasing, there's no place I can go. There's no monument, there's no building, no portrait. There's not a bench by the road to honor the sites where African Americans have contributed to history. So this society actually gives a bench to sites that they feel evoke the feelings that Toni Morrison intended, that it needs to be recognized, big and small. So there's one in Paris, there's one at the Schomburg, and then there's places that aren't as well known, that I'm not familiar with. I remember Nyack, it was another place, but Elmira will have the 33rd. Our bench was just delivered, and we will be having an installation ceremony. I'm gonna try to find a way to get it out to people, because we'd like people to come out and help us celebrate. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you about my fundraiser. This is a party with a purpose. The money from the fundraiser goes to the building fund. We actually have a separate little building fund, just like church. We have a building fund, and this money is put there. We didn't do anything during COVID, obviously, with social distancing, and also because it's a hard time to ask, we felt, others for money. Of course, I got plenty in the mail. Other people didn't have that problem. But we had our first fundraiser since COVID last year, and it was fabulous. And this year it's going to be even better. We're bringing in a recording artist that is a hometown guy. I like to keep the Elmira connection. And a lot of people know him. And I just said, you need to get your ticket to have some FUN in this fundraiser, right? The museum schedule. We are working on getting our website updated, of course, but the schedule is loosely this. We open in May, and we close the end of October. Thankfully, I have a great volunteer that makes it possible for us to be open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 12 to 5. So we're really proud of that. You can take a tour by appointment. So just send something to our email and we'll accommodate. We also have our first part-time employee, and last year was a great year. Americans who tell the truth, aren't we honored to have John Jones be included in this gallery? In fact, the Rockwell will be showing some of his work. Robert Shetterly is like just brilliant, Harvard-educated author, who, when he took exception with some of the politics at the time, decided to identify Americans he felt who tell the truth. So they're whistleblowers, they're freedom fighters, they're people who stand for social justice. And they range from, the time range is from the 18th century, I'd say, 18th, 19th century to present. So you could have someone, and it's men, women, children, it's black, white, whatever. It is the most fabulous thing when you go in there. You can sort it the way you want. And it's to inspire, I'm using the C word, critical thinking, right? That what would the conversations be with these people? You know, what did they sacrifice and what did they leave? John Jones has been included. His portrait was completed a few months ago. So I'd like to, you know, I don't know how we're going to show it. You know, I'd like to get it out. I would love for, I'm an Elmira first person. I'd love for Elmira to be able to unveil it, but I'd be more than honored to see it here. We're going to get it here. And then finally, there's the statue, the crossing. The crossing is complete. Like I said, I was inspired to get a statue in pure ignorance. I was just like, I think I need a statue because John Jones he needs to be memorialized, right? Statues represent what our values are for society. So absolutely, yes, this is inspirational and aspirational. So we're going to get this statue. I had no idea what I was doing, but God has worked me through it. The statue was done by Gary Weissman, who is a world-renowned sculptor. He's done the statues at Elmira College, and he is magnificent. I want to show him, but I'm not going to, because you need to come and see it. And that will be huge, and we have to do it this year. I just recently found out the second part of it, which is as significant as the statue, is getting it installed, getting the base and so forth and so on. So once again, I've had a lot of help. A lot of people in the community. I can't say enough about it to help guide me to some of the best people around. So we have that going on. So that is the end of my presentation. So visit us May through October, Tuesday to Saturday, 12 noon to 5 p.m. and help us continue to preserve this historic place, this space and its history. Donate in person, via PayPal, you can go online, or you can mail your check to our P.O. box. And I caution folks, because the first thing they do when they look online, they get our address. There's no one there to take the mail, so we use a P.O. box, and we'd appreciate it. And we're old school. I have no Venmo. I have no, what's the other thing? They're not going to hack the mail, so we go with the mail. And that in small print down there, I should have made that bigger. John W. Jones Museum at gmail.com. I have business cards. I forgot my rack cards. And our website is johnwjonesmuseum.org. There is another site out there that is a pirate. We are John, the whole thing, johnwjonesmuseum.org.
We want to make sure we have that.
Oh, I'm here for questions. I keep trying to go.
I'm going to try to run to everyone because there's a big group here tonight. I think I'm going to stand in the middle and I'll repeat your questions. Okay. So when you see hands, we can kind of tag team and call on folks. Okay. And I'll repeat them before you answer so that we capture them in our recording.
We're a great team. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Wherever. Right ahead. I'll repeat it.
What process did you use to select Gary Wiseman as the sculptor?
Somebody whispered in my ear, and I asked him, and he said yes. I did get a chance to see some of his work, but I really was operating in the dark, so yeah.
He's a great artist.
Yes, he is. He is fabulous. In fact, when I asked him, I said, no, I assumed that he was going to take it, so I started running with the information. I said, I forgot to ask you, is this something you want to do? He says, I do what I want, and this I want to do. So he did a great job. It's so impressive.
We've spoken sometimes about a children's book, a coloring book, or what's the progress there?
Well, let me repeat that so folks can hear. The question is about a children's book or a coloring book about John Jones and what the progress is on that.
So I am taking a shortcut. I want to write a book. I decided to be a coloring book. I haven't had a chance to do it because I'm deep in this grant writing place, but I do have some of it done. Thank you, Claire. But there are 2 children's books that were done. In 2008, the Sunday school class of Faith Temple did a children's book dedicated to Lucy Brown. So we have that, and I'm going to work with Faith Temple to get some more copies to see if we can polish that up again and publish it. The Notre Dame service class for the last 4 senior years have completed a book, and it is fantastic, and it is already published. Well, not published, printed. We'll work on publishing later. But Deb Frito brought her service class 5 years ago. The kids were so impressed that they used his story to talk to their adopted school of Divin. So they decided they wanted a book to read, and they started writing the book. Well, these kids graduated, and the next group took it on, and they graduated, and the next class took it. 4 classes, they completed it, and it's illustrated by one of the seniors, one of the graduates that's at the Philadelphia Art School. So it's an impressive job. They really did a nice job. It's for sale at the museum. But we definitely want to, with schools that want to, we want to make sure it's in their library. Thank you, Claire.
Sure. Talima, I knew that Juris Langdon and Frederick Douglass were buds, were friends. Was John Jones part of that consortium, so to speak, or part of the abolition, the Frederick Douglass piece?
So Frederick Douglass and John Jones are almost polar opposites. As you know, Frederick Douglass is, they said that he is the most photographed person during that time. He loved to be in front of people and talk. John Jones has a more, he's a get her done guy. He's action. His voice, when you see something he said and where he's quoted or something he wrote, is very humble. They did run in the same circle though, because Jervis Langdon, who was a great abolitionist and sympathizer, and Jervis Langdon also had put John Jones up at some time, as he did with Frederick Douglass. So, you know, yeah, they were all contemporaries and they did know each other. One of the things I did not mention is that they had one of the biggest Freedom Day celebrations in Elmira, where they brought in, there was groups of 300 and 400 coming from Syracuse and Utica and all these places. Frederick Douglass was the orator, the speaker for the day, and John Jones was the president of the day. A Freedom Day celebration is what you're familiar with Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the name that they gave it in Texas because it was sometime in June when they finally found out years later that they were free. Well, it's a rolling day, and in the northern states, a lot of them call it Emancipation Day or Freedom Day, and there's celebrations. Well, was a huge one here. Again, Frederick Douglass was here, and he came enough that we have the African Methodist What's the name of the church, Holly? Jeffrey?
African Methodist Episcopal Zion.
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass. So it started off being the African Methodist Episcopalian Zion Church. After Frederick Douglass came, it was the Frederick Douglass African American Episcopal Zion Church. When Frederick Douglass died, it became the African American Frederick Douglass Memorial Church. Yes.
She's a Baptist.
I am a Baptist. I am a Baptist.
I have time for a few more, a couple more. If you say it, I'll repeat it for you.
I'm just curious about the tactics that Jones employed in order to keep fugitives from South safe under his care while they were going to the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, that's a great question. The tactics that he employed to make sure that fugitives were safe during their journey, because as you were saying, there are no accounts of any of them being captured on their journeys. What kind of tactics did he use to ensure that?
You know, there's nothing documented, okay, that I know of. There could be something out there still. And I said Elmira is as Elmira was reading those papers in 1892. There was no secrets. So people knew, but they turned a blind eye. But remember, he put them on the train. And if you know anything about Elmira and where the First Baptist Church was, about the parking lot, Sales and Evans is about where his house was. If you walk, my distance is bad, but if you walk 100 paces, you're at the train. And it was a big depot on 2nd Street. He was putting them on the train, and the train didn't, if they stayed on the train, it went directly to Buffalo. So pretty much, if he had sympathizers that allowed them to go into this baggage car, they were good. So I guess the big thing was for them to get to him. And then he would, where he put them in the house, I have no idea. Does that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Once he and his brothers got here, how did they avoid being sent back down to the South? Because they were escaped slaves.
Well, New York, slavery was,
But you mentioned that even free states, they could be sent back.
this is true, but I don't think that it was rife with slave catchers. You know what I mean? You know, they roamed. There is a story, and I didn't capture that, but there is a story where there was 12 escaped fugitives that were working in and about Elmira. And a judge who had Southern sympathies told one of the, I don't know if it was Jervis Langdon, it might have been Jervis Langdon, one of the sympathizers. So they hurried up and rounded these guys up, took the shortcut over the hill, took them somewhere so that they were not seen when the slave catchers came. So that makes me think that the slave catchers didn't really just reside here. You know, their money is pulling them back into the South, right? So, yeah. Yeah.
Any, one more, going once? Yes, ma'am.
Tell us how students react when they visit the museum.
Tell us how students react when they go to the museum.
You know, I am so surprised because I thought not having any electronics happening and not, you know, first of all, you can't get anybody's attention. They are very respectful, reverent. Some of them are like when the Notre Dame students came, they're very informed. They actually know a little history around the Civil War and so on. They're amazed that something's that old, that including me, right? They're amazed that when I say, oh, this was his original wallpaper, what? Don't touch it. So it's been really great. The kids are fantastic. That's why we want that room so that we can get these school tours going. Yeah, we actually had a small school come out of Pennsylvania one year, 11th and 12th grade. Some very small town, like I didn't even understand, how did you find me? But they sought us out, they came. Before COVID, we piled them in, even with COVID, there was more people in there than we should have had. But they were so good and they wanted it so badly that teacher started a black history course, a black studies course, and he wanted to bring his students back again. And this is a town that has no black people, So I think young people are open to information and they just soak it up, and they love the story of John Jones.
And I believe there's one last question over here to
That's
finish
cool.
us off.
I know in the introduction there was a, overview of how you're involved now, but just wondering how you became involved in the first place with John Jones' history and legacy and this passion.
Well, I grew up in New York City, and you take for granted all of that art and culture around you. My mother's a New Yorker, so she could supplement what I was learning, outside with the black history of New York and of our family and stuff like that. And I'm not the scholar, and I wasn't an artist or anything like that, but it's just always been part of my life. If you're shopping in New York and it starts raining, you don't have an umbrella, you duck in a gallery, or you duck into, we would go, the public education would take us everywhere, I always say I had the best public education because they took us to everything. I mean, it got to be like, could you sign my slip? We're going to the Met again. We're going to the Museum of Natural History again. And then when I came to Elmira and then I had kids, I didn't have a lot of places to take them, and I didn't see our footprint anywhere. There was no mention, and I know we are everywhere and we've contributed to everything, but I saw nothing that looked like me. So when I was working at Aetna as part of their management team, they encouraged getting involved in the community. So we did Meals on Wheels and Red Cross and United Way and so on. But I was really looking for something that resonated with me. And then when I retired, and I was too young to be out, not too young, I was too poor to be out, I was looking for something else to get involved in. Lucy, Mrs. Lucy Brown, is actually a family friend of my husband's. Her son and them, they're best friends. Her daughter and I are very good friends, so before that. And so she had approached Jeff. She approached my husband because, when you're building your board, you want certain skills on there. And he was a journalist. He had the business column for the Star Gazette. And he says, oh, no, I can't do that now, but, you really need to talk to my wife. That's her thing. And that's how I got on. and here I am, and Lucy was nudging me all the way, because after a while she was like, I'm gonna need you to be president, you need to take this. I said, sure, Miss Lucy, And she's like, I'm not playing, I'm really tired now, and I need you to do this. So in 2016, when I retired, I assumed, I assumed the role of president, and we lost Miss Brown last year. But I would go over to see her and still, Lucy, this is what I want to do. What do you think? Oh, that's a good idea. You're doing a good job. Or, don't you do that. So, yeah. But it was the one place that I saw that I could really put my heart into.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.